I'll stand up later when I feel safe. Okay, so thank you for coming. So this talk, as I was telling Britt, that it doesn't really have a thesis exactly. It's think of it more as a kind of like meditation on some epistemological issues in philosophy of time. I'll be satisfied with that. Okay, so I don't want to really get into the weeds of what like the B theory of time is exactly, or different versions of it. I'm just going to something that I call static theory. And the key thing is static. So static theory is a realism about change and time order, but not passage or flow. And there's several different tenses of passage and flow as well. So the dynamic theory, by contrast, is going to incorporate possibly a few different things. Hopefully, it won't matter too much to talk. Yeah. So okay. So many dynamic theorists think that there's at least we have evidence of the existence of passage or flow just from the experience itself. I don't want to say that all of them think that, but a lot of them do. So we know, or at least we have evidence that time flows or passes because we experience that flow as such. And then there's a form of change that goes along with that. The only real, for a dynamic, there's real change is change that necessarily involves some kind of flow and passage. One characteristic, one response to this is what one calls illusionism, which is that there is in fact a passage phenomenology, but it's misleading, and this is often compared to motion illusions. I'm sure most of you know all of this already. But the illusionist says that no, this illusion of change does not require anything more than our at differences of mental state in the thought universe. Maybe a locus classicus of a kind of objection or a response to that. I don't know if Dummett is the first person to say this, but he's the one I see cited as an early opponent of this, which is that no, this is a response to the illusionism in defense of passage or flow. Is that no, this illusion of change or passage would be impossible without changing mental states. Again, usually in reference to motion. Talking about motion, you can't get a motion or change illusion without at least changes in mental states. Now compare this to some other arguments, and I want to see at least. I think there's at least a superficial similarity here, and I think maybe even a deeper similarity. Here's just a selection. These are not the only people who have said something like this, but I think that I think maybe if you look at these, you'll see a certain commonality. Zwart, B.J. Zwart says it would be impossible to use or understand language without passage. There's a line in the IAPT I'm not going to claim that's actually what Plato's saying, but it's actually suggestive of saying something like this. I bet many of you are familiar with Maudlin's 2007, where he says that consciousness would be impossible without passage. Here, passage in the special. Okay, thank God. Okay, although for him, Maudlin's a block theorist, but he thinks that there's passage also. I'm not going to try to parse that out. I think exactly. I don't do metaphysics anyway, but I definitely don't understand quite what that means. But he definitely thinks there's something passagey that is not captured by static or B theories properly. And then there's John Norton, not James Norton.
Not related.
Yes, they're related. Where it says something rather similar. Which is that there's this sort of serially occurring, effective awareness of events, and, where you have the one awareness after the other. That's impossible without some sort of passage. Okay, so there's some kind of I'm seeing like a pattern here. Okay, I'm seeing a pattern. And my
retake the screen because you moved the window.
Click the presentation.
Once.
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Well, these look actually more than a little bit like what's called transcendental arguments. And in fact, some pretty classic versions of transcendental arguments with the really classic versions from Kant mostly have to do with time and time awareness. So I want to talk about transcendental arguments a little bit, and then I'm going to come back to this list of arguments that we were looking at a minute ago. Okay, so the term transcendental, in this context at least, comes from Kant, and has something to do with pertaining to some necessary conditions of experience. A transcendental argument typically purports to refute some sort of skepticism, usually some kind of external world skepticism. In this case, it could be skepticism about the reality of passage or flow, by explaining that some condition Q questions by the skeptic is transcendentally necessary for some undeniable fact P about experience or cognition. Now, what does this modal sense of necessary mean here? This is something I want to talk about. It doesn't. I don't think it's a logical or conceptual necessity. I don't think it's intended to be a logical or conceptual necessity. The causal necessity is getting closer, but that's still not. It's still not what's meant here. So, what is meant by transcendentally necessary? Issue here. So the transcendental argument in general was just that by examining thought and or experience as we know it, as it is obviously internally, as we are aware of it, and then by reasoning about the transcendentally necessary conditions of thought and or experience, we can draw conclusions about the way the world must be. That's your classic form of what a transcendental argument looks like. Okay, don't worry about that. I'm not going to talk about all this. Don't. You don't even have to read it. Actually, yeah. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how Kant's refutation of idealism, which I think is probably the locus classicus for transcendental arguments is. It doesn't matter how it works or whether it works. My point here is just that it exists. So that's all you need to know. Kant thinks that our self-awareness as temporal beings requires our having actual experience of objects, persistent objects in space. And there's a line of reasoning that gets us to that through the concept of rule-governed, getting guidance in terms of organizing our own thoughts by thinking in terms of rule-governed alteration change in relatively permanent objects. Alteration change as opposed to something like replacement change or change of point of view. There's other reasons why my experiences might sort of change. And so but when I think about experiences, I've got to sequentially order them in order to have any kind of coherent self-consciousness at all. And his reasoning includes that he's on the idea that this experience of these external objects undergoing alteration change cannot be merely either illusory or even inferential, because the possibility of experiencing an illusion or making an inference from experience requires my already being able to organize my experiences in time. So again, don't worry about how that argument actually works. Again, it exists. So temporal, my awareness of myself as a temporal being requires actual experience, not just apparent experience of actually permanent things in space. So the most famous critique of this comes from Barry Stroud. For some of you, if you know all this stuff already, then there's not going to be much interesting here for you. But it says that he's just as a blanket statement, he says, no, this kind of argument cannot succeed at all. The only way it can succeed is by resting on some form of idealism. Because he just said, I don't see how it would ever not be sufficient for you to just have the representation or the appearance of something permanent. In the case of Kant, why would it not be enough for you to just think that you experience something permanent? in space undergoing change. How could you possibly actually have to have the experience? What could possibly be the difference? And he expands on that to all transcendental arguments. The whole argument form is a mistake. Although transcendental arguments are not really distinguished by form. It's just kind of like most components or something. It's kind of the subject matter. But he said that whole type of argument is just doomed to failure. He does think that you can do something more modest, where you can establish conceptual invulnerability. In other words, that there's some conceptual, conceptual framework that we just can't do without, and we can't even question the existence of that conceptual framework because the existence of that conceptual framework is itself a condition of our having any coherent ability to question our conceptual framework. It's around like that. He thinks that's fine. There aren't being vulnerable. Like he famously says that color, the great book, The Quest for Reality, from a while ago. You probably don't know this one, but he thinks that color properties are like this. They're just part of our conceptual framework. And you can't even identify what you're talking about. In questioning color, the objective reality of color properties, unless you've already accepted the objective reality of color properties. But which doesn't make the color properties real objective. It just means it's an invulnerable conceptual framework for us. So, and now here, a little more relevant to our subject area. For example, Kassim Kassam from Self and World talks about how self-conception as corporeal beings. We have to conceive of ourselves as corporeal beings traveling through space and time. And critically, our access to what's happening in space and time is limited by our place on that path. And if we didn't have that work on that as a perception, there would be no possibility of any kind of coherent experience or judgment. It's a very, very Kantian kind of idea. But it only makes the claim that this is part of our necessary conceptual framework. It doesn't say anything about what the world is really like. Okay? So this is the Straussian modest and concept-directed transcendental argument. This in a way kind of silences the skeptic because supposedly you can't raise the issue without already buying into the conceptual framework. But with the modest transcendental argument, no proof of the contrary proposition is offered. It says something about the conceptual framework, not about the world. The skeptic is not refuted because, after all, it's perfectly consistent to say that a belief can be invulnerable to doubt. So false. Our dynamic theorist is not going is may believe in conceptual vulnerability, but also believes in the real deal. And furthermore, the static theorists may, not necessarily, but may agree that the concept of passage is indispensable to language and thought. And so we must actually represent the world as involving passage. Now, they also may not. I don't agree with that. I think Christie does not agree with that, for example, right? Because the concept doesn't.
That's all the important people, Adrian.
Sorry?
All the important people don't agree with that.
All the important people don't. But one certainly might. It's not. It wouldn't be. You could concede invulnerability. You could concede evil as a static. So many like Stroud have maintained, and it's become kind of a dominant view, really, with transcendental arguments, which is why the field is almost a little bit moribund at this point. Think that, the whole transcendental argument concept is a completely, the real transcendental arguments, like real ones, are world-directed, right? It means they're supposed to prove something about reality. You look at your own experience, you realize that there's a transcendental condition, a necessary condition for that kind of experience. Now I know what the world is like in some respect. That whole thing is a mistake. It can't possibly work. But, and I would compare this to the motive to just the rejection of synthetic a priori knowledge. And this is really how Kant arrives at synthetic a priori knowledge. It's the whole methodology. But it also, in a way, I would suggest that if you make a blanket statement, no world-directed transcendental argument can possibly succeed. But what kind of a statement is that exactly? Is it an analytic or conceptual truth? I don't think so. I mean, it's not true by definition or anything like that. It would be something I would be difficult to show evidence for. So it kind of looks to me like a synthetic a priori claim itself. This is the point made by a couple of years. Simon Schultz just last year has actually a much more extensive paper on this event. I was interested. I can tell you about that. So you could argue that this blanket skepticism about transcendental arguments is in a way kind of self-undermined. Kind of like when Hume says, well, the only kind of knowledge is, analytic or conceptual truth. There's something based on evidence. But that statement itself is neither an analytic or conceptual truth nor based on evidence, right? Classic. Problem, they're kind of the same issue, right? So I will concede that I'll go ahead and say, yeah, you can't reject all transcendental arguments en masse and a priori. Thinking about our consciousness requires passage transcendental argument, that sort of grouping that we were looking at, that the Zwart, Ludlin, Norton stuff, which were all kind of basically not to something similar. So you're either going to have to prove that they're wrong, or show that the burden is on them to prove that they're right. So which one is it going to be? And now this is really what we need to talk about. So before we get back to them, let's talk about the kind of ultimate case for the anti-transcendental argument camp to deal with, which is what I call performative transcendental arguments. It's a particular subcategory. So the performative anti-skeptical transcendental arguments alleges that the very expression or performance of skepticism about some proposition of P demonstrates the actual falsity of P. Now, these could be concept directives that didn't be done well directed, and we appreciate the entirely superfluous. I had to throw that in. So effectively, this would involve identifying a performatively self-falsifying proposition, not saying really self-falsifying, not self-refuting, not just self-refuting, but self-falsifying, in the sense that the performatively self-falsifying proposition denies the necessary condition of its actually being affirmed, which could include being thought, being stated, or even being contemplated. Let's look at some quick examples in the history of philosophy. These are all things that they're not necessarily stated as such, but they could be derived from what is said. And at least as far back as Dainton in the 70s was thinking about Descartes' cogito in this way. If you say, I do not exist, well, you have demonstrated that you do. Or, if you think or wonder about whether you exist, you've already that you do, right? And now, based on his this elaborate cosmological argument in the third meditation, I'm sure you're familiar with it. If you wonder whether or not God exists, you've already shown that God does exist, according to me, right? According to Descartes' reasoning for meditation. It would follow from Kant's refutation of idealism that any statement of judgment whatsoever itself demonstrates that you have had contact with, you've had actual contact with permanent objects and operation change. For Putnam, if you're able to successfully state or wonder if you are operating the bad, successfully as in some actual natural language and not what in Putnam's called bad English or bad Italian, if that works better for you. Then you're not operating the bad. Mary Midgley and I think Swinburne also talks about this. They think that if, under a very materialistic theory of mind, you don't really have beliefs. So if you're able to believe in materialism, then materialism is false. Now, Brad Mitchell and Miller don't actually assert that this is a self-falsifying proposition, but I think they're concerned that it might be under naturalistic theory of representation. Is that fair? Right? Okay, so I'm just saying C, I'm not saying attributing this to them, but it's a concern that under a timeless theory of QG, there's no such mental representation under a naturalistic understanding of it. So that potentially could be added to this. Okay, so let's return to the allegation. So first look at the statement by Price, and then we'll get to modeling. Okay, so Price argues that if on his view, I'll assume you are somewhat familiar with this, on the block model, imagine, the world is as the eighth theory wants it to be. Well, now imagine a world that isn't, right? Just on the block model says, well, every state that we have just kind of gets mapped onto the state of our counterpart in the block universe. And what would be the difference? Everything would seem the same, everything would be the same. Okay, now, so famously, and again, I bet many of you are familiar with Malden's response to this, is that he thinks that, that our doppelganger in this universe, the block universe without passage, Malden's a block universe, but he has passage. So, whatever, Price's block universe, which has no passage. Nothing happens in that world. There's also no causation, let's get that bit, but it really doesn't matter. There's something dynamic that's missing from that world where you can map from bits of this world to bits of our own, but the state of this world is so unlike, it wouldn't work. There could be no mental states without stuff really happening. It's according to the model, nothing really happens. It's pure prescient. So we would have all our brain events that we associate with consciousness, but no causation, no true change or activity, and thus no consciousness, right? And so the passage-less block universe would contain what I like to call time zombies. And I guess the zombie here appears to be moving forward, but actually, of course, it's just occupying different places at different times. It's not actually doing anything. Is it even the same zombie at different times? I don't know. I don't do metaphysics. But that could be another problem. So the idea is that the very articulation of a skeptical attitude towards the reality of the world of dynamic change exemplifies an actualized capacity that is argued, is thought to be impossible unless we actually live in the world of dynamic change. So I think it's true to say there's variations, but I think for Dummett's work, Moglen, Norton, and other people in their worldview, any attempt to question the reality of passage would demonstrate that reality by exemplifying, something pretty similar. Dynamic change in mental states and Dummett states, use of language for Zwart, consciousness, the experience itself really, or sequentially occurring states, which in turn are necessary for experience. And each of this is alleged to be possible. So, if you say or think, I am experiencing the illusion of dynamic change, well, that experience would require dynamic change in some mental states. If you say there's no such thing as a passage of time, well, if you are able to articulate that claim, you need passage. Now, Dummett does not concern me personally, because I'm a deflationist. At least in this sense of deflationism, some of you have other maybe different definitions, but I call this deflationism. I do the passage of positive error and illusion. So there's no experience. In my opinion, there's no experience as of the passage of time anyway. So that's not really a concern. You don't have to explain away the illusion. You don't have to do anything to explain the illusion of passage of time. So this is a kind of contra illusionism. It's a different kind of response to Dummett that doesn't that takes away this issue altogether. Now, so the major premise in Dummett is that the illusion of passage requires the passage of mental states and the static theories can dynamically experience passage, but this doesn't directly address the other versions of what I guess I'll call a passage pasta, resting on the major premise that consciousness or experience requires passage. This would not require, this doesn't actually rely on any specific like temporal experience or temporal phenomenology or just passage qualia. Any experience, any consciousness whatsoever would do the trick. So we need to say more rather than just be deflations. A little more, not much more, but a little more. They don't do it in the case of Dummett. Now, Stroud's, you'll recall Stroud's answer to TAs in general is that the illusion or false belief should be sufficient to satisfy any proposed transcendental conditions. According to the passage pasta, it's not enough that we merely experience time as passage or that we merely believe that it does. We don't think we're experiencing anything that dangerous in that. And I like the only thing that's really kind of cool about performative transcendental arguments is that it really draws out, it gets your attention right on what is being argued, which is that the very performance of your skepticism is supposed to be proving it wrong. Right? So you just look, I don't even have to answer you, you just show that you're wrong just by telling me that I'm wrong. So that's why I like positing. I don't like the cars, but I like that. Now, so what are the main, there are premises though behind each of the ones, like in the earlier list, like on the cogito pasta, is hinting over. It does assume that thought requires the thinking subject, and that's what one would normally say in response to Descartes at this point. The brain in a vat pasta assumes content externals. And that's one of the things you could say in Python. Well, I'm not a content externalist, so the argument does not bother me. Now, there is a premise here in our passage pastas that consciousness or something necessary to consciousness or coherent experience requires the passage of time. We accept that. So any world-directed TA, any proper TA, rests on establishing now some transcendentally necessary connection between our holding some beliefs and their being true or false. But, as we said earlier, now returning to this point, transcendental necessity is not logical or conceptual necessity. How do we establish transcendental necessity? Which is another way of asking that is like, how do we say like uniquely, this is the only way from getting A to B? This is the only way for us to have this kind of experience. The only way, right? The necessity, the modality of it. How do you establish that, right? If it's not analytic or conceptually true, which I don't think it is. And so another way of putting it is, okay, how do we know? Reflecting on the epistemological situation. How do we know that consciousness can't happen without passage? Do we have evidence? That would be good, but I don't think we have evidence because I'm just going to say I'm not going to go into the whole argument about this. I'll just like cite some folks who've made some points that I'll just say that I agree with. That I think the dynamic theorist argument of experience fails as a prima facie case. For passage without begging the question, I'll just refer you to a lot of people have probably said something like this. I'll just refer you to a couple of places where you can look at that, and I'll just say that I agree. You have to show that you just map onto your blockganger with time zombie. Blockganger is not a time zombie in case of price, right? It's a regular person. Why wouldn't that work? Why would you change the service? Furthermore, and I'll just list some other people that I agree with and admire tremendously. A number of people have noted that, how we make the world different in terms of static block university. Show me how. We'll note, though, that we are assuming here that experience itself is possible in a static block universe when you ask that question, right? Okay. Citing Miller, recently Miller 2023, and there's others, something like this. Is that the perception of passage, illusory enough, would require that we literally experience the present as it needs. And what would that experience really consist in? Once again, we are assuming that experience itself is possible in the static block universe when we say that. Now, so where's the burden of proof? And this is really what, to the extent that I have any thesis at all, David just give me a thumbs up or something. But I don't know. Whatever that was for, I appreciate it. To the extent that I have any thesis at all, I'm trying to say something about a burden of proof, although even in making that claim, I'm just sort of like accepting as correct this idea that the argument of experience fits. And I'll just refer you to a lot of other good arguments that. Okay, so if the argument of experience is deflated by deflationism, shouldn't we put the burden on the dynamic theorists to establish this connection between consciousness and passage? If there's no, because then now there's no evidence, right? It's not a conceptual truth, and if you don't experience is not giving you evidence of passage. Now what do we have except a kind of intuition, some kind of a priori intuition about the connection between a dynamic change, not the B theory for form of change, special, the flowy change or that passage change, and its connection to consciousness, that effectively places constraints on what our physical reality is. But yeah, I'm almost done. All right. After all, do we not reject, at least I do, the fine-tuning argument for God because it's making unsubstantiated a priori assumptions about things like the inherent improbability of certain configurations of laws and fundamental constants. In addition, interestingly, talking about the range of conditions necessary for conscious life. The Kalam cosmological argument, among other things that it does wrong, rests on an a priori premise that actual infinities can't exist. You know that. Intuition? I don't know. So, does consciousness require passage because causation or active change, whatever it is that is being demanded by the dynamic theorists, activity, in some sense that is not captured, that allegedly is not captured by the block, right? Or the passageless block, requires passage. How do we know such things? And this is I'm asking you at this point, right? Especially when at some point, like for example in modeling, this stuff is just fundamental. The causal arrow. That's the end. One of the things that for modeling is the end of the line. There's just the causal arrow. That's all there is to it. There's no further analysis to be drawn. But if you're not going to do any more analysis, then how are you going to establish this connection? Static block theorists agree that events such as thoughts, mental states, and transitions of mental state to other mental states do happen. There are happenings. There's activity. But they also maintain, as I'm sure you know, that the addition of this intrinsic passage or flow of events is just superfluous and not backed up by experience. Just something I'm just accepting. So where's the burden? Just so long. So I suggest the burden of proof, and I've already kind of been hinting at this point, that it always lies in this like claiming synthetic a priori knowledge. And I think that for modern Norton, are claiming synthetic a priori knowledge as there's something really substantive. They're making a substantive claim about a connection between something like passage and flow of consciousness. And hey, it's the passage theorist, I think, who's making a positive suggestion that would add ontology. And if you reject the argument from experience, which I just am, there's no evidence of passage. Nor, and this goes into more, most of the stuff like, Christie and Natalia and Kiko, I don't think there's any sensible way to explain how we would test it, even if it were. And Prosser. And going back to, Parmenides or whatever, there's a lot of puzzles about what the hell passage would be and how it would work. Depending on what you think it is. Is there a change in the past? all those kinds of questions. So let's throw that in there too. So, okay. So, yeah, so to the extent that I'm claiming anything here, I will concede that I don't think transcendental arguments en masse should be ruled out a priori, but the burden is generally on the proponent to establish uniquely necessary transcendental conditions of experience. You've got to at least start with some kind of prioritization case for the claim condition. And I think even in the case of alleged performative self-falsification, which is the kind of like the toughest possible case for this guy. And again, so because experience does not make a prioritization case of passage, I am awaiting a compelling reason, which you should feel free to offer me, to worry about the conditions of the possibility of experience or consciousness beyond our plain old stack.
Where's the just down in the box?
Can I keep this on?
Yeah, you can keep that. All right. So keep your hands up, and I'll make some sort of like. We're gonna start with Graham.
Okay.
I have a question.
Thanks. So you said to offer you compelling reasons. Luckily for you, I've got a forthcoming book that deals explicitly with transcendental arguments and engages with this. But the move that I make is subtly different from the one that you discuss, and I kind of want to advertise that as a move to consider. The rest of what you say is also going to apply to me, so I'm not going to get off that easy. But Chris Hookway has a really nice paper on pragmatic transcendental arguments, and this is very much in the tradition of Charles Sanders Peirce.
Wait, what was the name?
Chris Hookway.
Oh, Chris Hookway, okay.
Yeah. So the idea is we also get pragmatic transcendental arguments from Kant, but in the third critique. So in that case, it's not that we get belief at the end, because as you mentioned, it's not clear we can do anything that strong with the transcendental argument. What we get at the end is hope. And this kind of, we're allowed to go on as if it's true, because we're entitled to hope that it is. And so that move to a pragmatic transcendental argument is meant to sidestep some of the epistemic worries that we might have about transcendental arguments. And then so we've got this account of like why we might be entitled to hope these things. And I've got a paper that came out last year that kind of tries to discuss that in the case of contemporary metaphysics. But yeah, so I think pragmatic transcendental arguments might be an interesting kind of variation of the transcendental argument for you to think about.
So hope, it sounds like a connection to like Kant and the canon of period and hoping that there's a God, essentially.
Yeah, so that's where Peirce gets it from, and then
Yeah.
Peirce does a load of stuff with it. And then Hookway was the Peirce scholar, or he's the Peirce scholar.
Hope, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I think I have to read this stuff, so
Yeah.
I'll look at it. I don't know what else to say about that. Thank you. I got to write that.
I'm not going to be nearly as intelligent as Grant on this topic, but I just wanted to make a psychological note of the meta performance of the talk here and how often you refer to the clock as your talk here. There was a performative aspect of the passage of time throughout your giving of the talk, and there was this very visceral point, the experience of the passage of time because of your reference point of at least demonstrating to us.
I want to know at what moment of the talk I'm at that.
Yeah, no, I understand why. It's just, it was a meta experience
Okay.
in the room, and I think that was really kind of very interesting because we are human beings experiencing these things at this moment.
Well,
Just
yeah.
question that, an observation.
Okay, I reject that we, on top of knowing like what time it is now, we are also experiencing something else, which is the experience of a whole other thing, which is the flow.
I accept and reject that.
Okay.
Thanks, Adrian. That was awesome.
So I'm very tempted to accept your diagnosis of what's going on, namely that people need to be put that pressure on them to explain why that's why these synthetic a priori claims. But my only mild worry is there seem to be cases of sort of self-undermining arguments that have similar structures that seem sort of entirely virtuous, but about which one can say the same thing. So the example I have in mind is, say, Boltzmann brains. It seems plausible that if you believe that you're a Boltzmann brain, this would undermine your reasons for believing it, because you have no reason to believe that the laws of nature are whatever the hell they are, because you've drifted your memory or something. That seems right. It seems like we couldn't reasonably believe we have Boltzmann brains. If it could be, we couldn't reasonably believe it, and so forth. But someone might come along and say, yes, well, there's this synthetic a priori claim that evidence depends on kind of causal connections to the past and the reliability of memory and so on, and that's all very dubious. But that doesn't seem dubious, and it does seem right that you couldn't believe you're a Boltzmann brain. So I'm tempted to think there's some difference between that case and these cases where I would say, go Adrian, that's absolutely right, but I'm not sure what that difference is.
Well, there's, or like you say, I believe I am Swamp Man also. Or I believe this is a little bit similar to the brain and the bat, right? Not exactly, not for the same reason, I guess, but there's a certain so I'm supposed to explain why the one is okay and one is not, right?
That's the thought, yeah.
So you do not think that is, I believe I'm a Boltzmann brain is somehow self-identifying. You do not.
No, I think it is. I believe I'm a Boltzmann brain is something I couldn't have good evidence. I couldn't have evidence supporting my belief.
Okay. Wait, so what is the problem for me?
Problem is that suppose we think it's absolutely correct that the Boltzmann brain guy could say, I can't have any real belief that any justified belief that I'm a Boltzmann brain. That seems to depend on just the kind of synthetic a priori claim about evidence and so forth, which could be in principle doubtful. I mean, if you want to say in these other cases where you shouldn't accept the consequences of the synthetic a priori claim, then you are entitled to say, yes, that's the problem, go and justify that.
Do you think that Boltzmann brains are possible?
Yeah.
So you think that you could be a Boltzmann brain?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I can't reasonably think I am one.
That's cool. No, I can't think about it. I'm sure I'll have a very smart answer for you as soon as I'm not in a position to answer it.
You will always be in a position to answer it.
Yeah. If I had a few minutes, I think I'd probably say something to you, but I think I can't write them.
Cool.
But I'll get back now.
Sorry, this is a little bit half-baked. I'm just sort of wondering what you would think about a slightly different format of the argument that where you have say the second premise or some inference that sort of looks like a transcendental argument, but it's just one of the inferences in the argument. So you start off with something like things require change. Consciousness is one of these things, so consciousness requires change, and then you can get either an atheist and you can maybe get to the same or a similar place that sort of change that makes sense. Is passage change? Would that be just as bad as a spectrum?
I don't think you successfully evaded having to draw the connection between consciousness and change. You've sort of like verbally evaded it a little bit, but I would come back and say, okay, tell me about this connection between these two things right here, right? Or what is meant when you say that things involved require change? Was that the first one? Just like everything?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, then I'd say, you got to tell me more about that. Well, that's an even harder one, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I would kind of come back and say the same thing.
Okay.
Yes, sorry, this question isn't going to be terribly well formed, but I guess I'm wondering whether people who deny that time passes would actually basically make the same argument that Kant makes. And basically the ability of transcendental argument to their own, to say that our experiences necessarily involve the experience of passage. They don't require passage itself to be the world, but they do require the experience of passage, which is pretty similar to Kant's own argument that our experiences are necessarily timed. And thus we can't conclude there's any time among things themselves, and most can't fix we can't know things themselves at all. But his argument, as I understand it, is that time is sort of necessary, synthetic by a mode of experience, given the sense situation. And because we would always experience things as tiny, regardless of whether there's time or not, we therefore can't conclude that there's time out there as well. So I'm wondering if people who deny passage could actually agree with sort of 90% of what these transcendental arguments are saying. They could sort of say, I don't agree that passage itself is required for experience, but I agree that we have to experience passage. We have to have passage experiences, necessarily passage experiences. But it's for that exact reason that we can't conclude that passage is out there in the world, because we would have passage experiences regardless of whether those passages are.
Okay. So two things. Thank you. So with regard to Kant, when he talks about time as the form of experience, he's really talking about time order, I believe. And there's actually a passage in the first analogy where he seems to. It's anachronistic to give him this distinction between the A and B series, but there is a passage which folks who are at the Winston-Salem thing, Carla Marina Ryman was pointing out, where it does look like if you gave him this distinction, he would have a problem with a change. And I could point you to that in the first analogy. And then secondly, I don't think that Kant is successful in I like Kant a lot, and I wrote my whole doctoral dissertation on the refutation of idealism, and I love it. It's very thought-provoking. I think it does fail without idealism, and I think pretty much everything he does fails without idealism. So whatever you're going to get out of Kant on time is going to be only going to succeed if you're really an idealist, in the way that he was immediately in 1781. He was you're an idealist. And yeah, I think they were right. Whatever no matter how much you protest about it. So I'm not. So for those reasons, I'm not too concerned about it.
Yeah, sure. I suppose you would end up kind of actually admitting that passage exists, but in an idealistic kind.
At best, and both. But even for Kant, the passage, like if you're talking about flowy passage, a passage, it looks like he'd be pretty skeptical of that anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Because really, he talked about time order in ways that would be consistent with what I'm calling static order.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for this. This actually sets up my question really nicely, which is great. Right, so going back to Kant and the idea that what we cannot get away from is time order. Has anyone been applying these transcendental arguments in the context of timeless universe views? Because you might think that transcendental arguments in the context of timeless universe views. Because you might think everyone agrees that we experience temporal order, and that maybe that's a sign that temporal order really exists in the world. But you could also just take it down to your line, right? And see that's part of our conceptual framework. But has anyone thought about it in this way?
Well, the person immediately to your left, actually, I was referencing, speaking from an objective perspective, I'm referencing Shelfers. To your left. Yeah, okay.
I love
You can answer your own question. Yes, we have done. Yeah, and there is discussion in there that either like so healing has a kind of transcendental stuff.
Yeah, the idea that timeless theories are epistemically coherent. Yeah. There's a whole tradition and a whole discussion about that. But I would really, the paper references Brad Mitchell Miller from 2019 is really terrific, and I think is looking at the questions that you're asking about. So if you're asking like, has anyone looked at that, and I may start there. So, okay. That's a great paper. Everyone should read that.
Hi, thank you. I'm a bit confused with the terminology because, sorry, I'm like to a small historical note. Kant, whenever he wrote his inaugural dissertation, he got directly 2 letters from Mendelssohn and Lambert, which were doing what you call a transcendental argument, saying that even an idealist about time must grant that the representation changed. This was directly got at. Kant chose not to reply for a long time, and then only in the critique we finally see his response. He didn't even reply to them. They kept acknowledging that there was a good argument against him. So, and then we see in the Transcendental Aesthetics, section 7, I think, distribution, where he mentions wise men, insightful men. And then he gives an argument against what you would call transcendental arguments.
Against the transcendental argument in favor of something by passage,
change in the world. Like, it's not clear what they mean exactly by change at that time. If they talk in terms of change,
he's an empirical realist about changing the world. I was just saying that I think that he fails in successfully getting to be both transcendental realist and empirical realist.
Yeah. So the argument is about transcendental realism or idealism. Yeah, so that's what I guess the transcendental argument what you call.
It's an argument against transcendental realism about change.
Transcendental realism about change. Yes. But what the argument that you gave, which I prefer calling it a Cartesian type argument, because they have a form of an experience as of X is sufficient for the reality of X, or something, the illusion of X is sufficient for X, something like that, the form of the arguments. See, this is kind of the form that the arguments have, but Kant tries to argue against that in that. And
in the aesthetic section 7.
Yeah. And then in the preface, he kind of hints at in the preface deep. Yeah, so there is a footnote where he's saying, which I think later on William James makes the distinction.
Footnote in the preface?
The experience of passage is not experience.
Succession is not succession experience.
Yes. So he says something.
Well, Kant says that explicitly in the.
So the representation of alteration is not alteration representation. I think.
Oh yeah.
So with that, an answer to that be a good answer against what you call transcendental arguments. What I would
answer to.
So as
we say an answer to that,
like as a refutation to the argument you laid out, that making this William James, right? Distinction, would that solve the problem? So the idea is you put everything in the content of the representation.
Oh, like extensionalism?
Yeah.
I like extensionalism.
Yeah, so I guess it would be extensionalism. I'm not sure how to translate that.
I think this feels like I need to sit down with you and look at these passages so I can get on the same page in terms of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But that all sounds awesome. Can I talk to you about it?
Yeah.
After? Yeah. Okay, but right now I don't think I can put all that together. But if we're talking about extensionalism, I'm thumbs up on extensionalism. I'm not defending Kant here at all.
Yeah, yeah. I was just worried of calling these arguments transcendental because it seems like this is exactly what he wants to reject. Because of how he responds to his letters.
Well, I think, I think that there's a fundamental inconsistency in Kant because he's trying to have it both ways. So I think that maybe that's what you're talking about. But I think that we need to have a longer conversation.
So we have a little bit more time. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for this talk. I have some questions. I mean, what we're talking concerning what we're talking already. On the one, no, I hold
Yeah,
it right.
you don't have to hold it.
Oh,
Is
okay.
the light on?
Yes.
Okay, then you're good.
Okay, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. Okay. So
It's not.
no. See?
So, yeah,
Yes, that is what. Oh.
and then
Okay, I don't touch. Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted. I was thinking about this idea of the block universe, and I have the impression that is like considering a human being, I mean man, like an observator, and in a way like as if he were outside of the world. I mean, there is something like the universe, which is already made, and an observator that doesn't belong to this universe. And I think that even the theory itself neutralizes the process of knowledge, because the theory of a block universe is a theory concerning the knowledge of the universe. So I think that it is contradictory to itself. And what I wanted to ask also about Kant, and also if I understood correctly, to make just a link with the performative, the transcendental arguments. So the problem I think that Kant faces is that I see the things it's outside of me, and these things do not change. Maybe it is also linked with his theory of things as such that I cannot know. But what I perceive finally is the changes, these changes, I must attribute them to myself, not to the things. So what actually I perceive is a flow of time, but this flow of time, if I understand correctly, Kant here, because I think that for Kant there is a flow of time. It's not a given time like an order, which is pre-existing, and the problem is that this flow of time, this passage, is completely subjective. I mean, for some people, time passes quickly, or sometimes time passes quickly for others. So this flow of time does not really enable us. Rather, it creates a problem in understanding or in describing experience. So this is one of the problems about time and about the flow of time. And I'm wondering in this context, if I understood correctly, what is exactly the idea, I mean, about the performative transcendental arguments, if you understand them as like worldly directed in a way.
So there's certain subjectivity about the flow of time from a psychological standpoint. And you're saying that creates a problem for the idea of a performative transcendental, well-directed performative transcendental argument.
No, I'm just trying to understand the link. I mean the relation between this passage of time and how could a performative transcendental argument could work as to explain this flow or to describe experience.
Well, I mean, in general, I don't think that they do work. None of the ones that I listed were successful, maybe with the exception of the concern that Brad mentioned, Miller had, which is the one that would give me the most pause. I'm having trouble. What is the argument that you're saying? How would it work? What would the argument be aiming to establish? That there is an objective flow of time?
I think that yes, I think that there cannot be an objective flow of time, or in any case, this is problematic.
Well, I mean, I totally agree for a lot of reasons. So, I think if you want someone to defend the possibility of that argument, I don't know if I can help you because I'm completely against it. So maybe we just agree.
Oh, yes, it was just a question if I understood exactly your the links and the relations that you established.
Yes. When I was talking flow of time, that was before we get to the issue of different subjective perceptions of the alleged flow of time. Although I don't think that there is any perception of the flow of time. So when we say time goes quickly, time goes slowly, like I would disagree with that whole way of framing the phenomenon in the first place. Like I don't agree that we do ever perceive time going quickly or time going slowly. Anyway, so I see no need to explain the phenomenon, at least not in these terms, which is purely a psychological matter about attention. I think it's an